So today I want to talk about being thankful for farm workers. If you live in the United States, then chances are that you're celebrating Thanksgiving today. That is, of course, unless you're being forced to work, you object to the celebration of the day, or are otherwise unable to celebrate the day for any number of reasons. That said, if you are in fact celebrating Thanksgiving, then chances are what you're doing is trying to gather with as many loved ones, friends, and family that you're lucky enough to have in your life. And you're going to sit down to what will be generally a larger and special meal, in which you'll also talk about the things that you're thankful for and the people that you're thankful for in your life. So, for today, I wanted to remind you all of a group of people that you should be thanking for today. That is, farm workers, many of whom are immigrants that helped bring your meal to your table. So, in thanking the farm workers and thinking of them today, I want to talk a little bit about their struggle. So, we know for a fact that roughly half of hired crop farm workers lack legal immigration status, and that only 27% of crop farm workers were born in the US, meaning 4% were immigrants who had officially obtained US citizenship, 21% were other authorized immigrants, primarily permanent residents or green card holders, leaving 48% to have no work authorization as of 2016. Now, this is a large percentage of the population who is, in fact, doing farm work and agricultural labor in the United States. Now, in order to talk more about this connected directly to Thanksgiving, there was a document created where your Thanksgiving meal comes from. So I wanted to go over some of this and just share some of that with you. You have pumpkin pie, which is, again, a traditional Thanksgiving dish. All of these are traditional parts of Thanksgiving dinners for a lot of different people. If this doesn't particularly apply to you, then I apologize, but at the very least, this is, for a lot of people, what more or less would encompass different aspects of a Thanksgiving dinner. So you have pumpkin pie. Pumpkins like squash, cucumber, and okra have fine hairs on their vines and leaves, which are highly irritating to the skin and eyes of the farm workers that harvest them. So in order to get the pumpkins and the squashes that you enjoy, it means that the farm workers have to deal with a highly irritating substance in the pumpkins and other squashes that can irritate their skin and eyes. This is actually quite common with a lot of different crops. Celery, for example, even though it's not on this list, celery actually has a caustic liquid that in sunlight can actually cause blisters and burn the skin. If you want to see something kind of gruesome, which I don't recommend, look up celery burns. They are really, really frightening at the damage that that can do. So a lot of the workers, when they're working with celery, will oftentimes wear long sleeves, even in the summer months when they're harvesting it. Now, in addition, you have parsnips. It's easy to lose a finger to the shaped blades needed to trim these hard root vegetables. So people are literally putting their bodies on the line for you to have parsnips. Meanwhile, the piece rates for hand processing the harvest of these root vegetables can be as low as 75 cents per 5-gallon bucket. That is ridiculously cheap that these workers are paid for what they're doing. Now with string beans, most are automated, but the more delicate varieties are picked by farm workers' hands. All of them are carefully sorted for size and quality before heading to consumers. When it comes to ham, it needs to be recognized that 51% of meatpacking workers that help get meat, such as ham, to our tables are immigrants. Apple pie. Immigrant farm workers harvest apples for $22 to $26 for each bin. Some farm workers prune apple trees in 23-degree weather. That's, of course, Fahrenheit for those who might be from outside the US watching this. Carrots. Immigrant farm workers hunch over for hours to make sure that they end up at our table. Salad. Vegetables that are used for salads are harvested across the country by immigrant farm workers. Sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are unearthed by machine or hand, but collected by and processed by immigrant farm worker hands. Especially in areas like Alabama, Georgia, it can be muddy and slippery work in parts of the season. Cranberries. Immigrant farm workers use the wet method and dry method to harvest cranberries. In the wet method, the bog is blooded and plants are shaken to dislodge the submerged berries. For Turkey, immigrants across the country work in various stages of meat processing to bring us the poultry that are the centerpieces of most holiday tables. And for mashed potatoes, immigrants, farm workers sort and clean potatoes by hand. And the document also reminds us that there is no Thanksgiving meal without immigrant farm workers, and that Congress must pass immigration reform in 2021. Now, part of the reason that I bring all this up and I show this to you is to remind you that there are people literally putting their bodies on their line, literally putting their health on the line, and putting themselves in potentially dangerous situations, such as extremely cold weather or situations where they might lose a finger, in order to get food to your table. So, at the very least, the people doing this deserve to have access to not having to worry about being kicked out of the country because of their immigration status. But realistically, more than anything, they deserve a decent and good life, just like everybody else. And when we look more into this, it's basically been found that less than 1% of US farm workers belong to a union, and many are paid very, very poorly. Today's farm workers face nearly as many challenges as they did 50 years ago. In addition to low wages and little to no job security, they experience high rates of poverty, food insecurity, sexual harassment, and mental health challenges. The group has one of the lowest unionization rates of any sector, and only 4 farm worker unions exist today, covering just a tiny fraction of the more than 1 million hired farm workers who toil on American farms and dairies. So this is the reality that a lot of them face. And this is unfortunately part of a historical precedent where farm workers and agricultural workers have basically been excluded from a lot of labor rights laws. So we have here that the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, which forbids employers from firing a worker for joining, organizing, or supporting a labor union, specifically excluded farm workers and domestic workers. Many of those were at the time African American. Of course, now a large part of that population is made up of immigrant labor coming from Central America and Mexico. And that labor is, of course, being treated in quite similar ways, where it's actually very difficult for people, especially because of immigration status, to feel like they can safely join or establish a union. Farm workers were also excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act enacted in 1938, which guarantees other workers a minimum wage, overtime pay, and other protections. In 1966, the act was amended to partially include agricultural workers in the minimum wage provisions, but 60 years later, farm workers are still not eligible for overtime pay. The law also offers few protections to child agricultural workers than to children in other industries, and those who work on smaller farms are not eligible for the federal minimum wage, which currently stands at only $7.25 an hour. So a lot of people are actually paid based on how much they produce. So if they produce a lot, they get paid a lot, but if they have injuries or they're not able to produce things as fast and pull things from the ground as fast, then they may not be paid. A lot of that practice was outlawed in a lot of other industries, including things like coal mining in much earlier times, like in the 1935 Act. Now, in addition to that, those who are still paid by an hourly rate still end up getting paid substantially low amounts for the amount of work that they put in and the amount of risk that they put themselves through. And again, this is a majority of the population of agricultural workers, which is represented by immigrants who have come into the United States. Now, in addition to all of that, it's worth noting that the Supreme Court actually made it harder recently for farm workers to unionize because they made it absolutely difficult for union members to get onto the property of farms. If you have workers that live on tents on the property and generally live on the farm, you're supposed to be able to get access to the farm during the day to help organize laborers. Now, the unfortunate reality is that the Supreme Court has backed up the idea that it appropriates private land by allowing organizers to go on the farm to drum up union support. So it's a protection for these large propertied landowners rather than the workers who harvest and do most of the work to bring crops to your table. And the Supreme Court again backed that up And basically, they limited them to only being able to enter the farm during non work hours, and they can only enter during set periods for a small number of days, which is very difficult to unionize people, especially when propaganda against the union is often put out. And it's very difficult if you are someone who just immigrated into the country and maybe you're either don't have an extensive knowledge of English, or if you are some way isolated because of your location, or if you have kids that you're fearful of, being harmed by the property owner. There's a lot of things that can go into making it more difficult for you to join a union. And access is probably the biggest thing, especially the propaganda against the union. Now, it's also worth noting that child labor laws generally do not apply to agricultural labor. Minors who are at least 16 years of age may perform any farm job, including agricultural occupations, declared hazardous by the Secretary of Labor at any time, including during school hours. Minors who are at least 14 years of age may work outside of school hours in any agricultural occupation except those declared hazardous by the Secretary of Labor. And minors who are at least 12 years of age may be employed outside of school hours with written parental consent or on a farm where the minor's parent or person standing in place of the parents are also employed. So if you're someone who's immigrated into the United States and you have a young child under the age of 12, the boss that is employing you can employ the child next to you. And that is absurd that you'd have 10 and 11-year-olds running around producing all of this and putting their body at risk, and putting all of their bodies essentially at risk. That is a scary proposition. And it's also worth noting within all of this, when we talk about immigrants coming to the United States, that many of them came here leaving their families behind. So if you're lucky enough to have family and you're sitting around a table with people who care for and respect you, then, consider what it must be like to have to leave behind the people that you love in order to try to create a better life for yourself because of things that are very much outside of your control, often tied to US imperialism. And it's a frustrating and scary experience when you consider all that. So with that said, I personally believe that these laborers deserve far more than our thanks. They deserve a decent life, and at the very least, that means a path for citizenship, so that they don't have to worry about losing their new homes. And it also should mean an end for child labor. It should also mean a movement towards unionizing these workers, and I think all of that's actually tied together. It means changing the way we view unions. It means making sure people are getting better opportunities, like in the United Farm Workers. And it means making sure that people can get access to these better wages and care. And eventually, what I'd like to see more than anything else is a movement to turning these farms into worker cooperatives, where the people coming in and working these farms and who are literally bringing the things into the boxes where they end up being transferred to the supermarket where we're able to get them, that the people who are actually performing the labor get a say in what's going on, that it isn't being given out to large property owners, but actually the people who do the labor getting to reap the benefits of what they do. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter, check out my Discord, or support me on Patreon. All of those links are in the description down below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you for watching.